day, everyone. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, which is second in a series of 3 on beating cancer in Europe, our Observatory Spotlight series. My name is Deepa. I'm with the European Observatory on Health Systems and Policies, and I'll be hosting this webinar for you today with my colleague, Erica Richardson. Last week, within this cancer webinar series, we talked about structured collaboration to improve cancer prevention, treatment, and care through the national cancer mission hubs, which are being set up across the different European Union member states. This week, we'll focus on improving access and especially equity in access to cancer clinical trials, trials which offer cutting-edge therapies to European populations. We know that there are stark disparities in access to trial. For example, a rural resident in Romania doesn't obviously have the same access as a well-to-do city dweller in, let's say, Antwerp or Brussels or Berlin. And besides that European East-West divide and the divide between big cancer centers in large cities and smaller towns and rural areas, we also know that people in lower socioeconomic strata of society, those with lower health literacy, migrants, for example, with communications challenges, etc., they face considerable access barriers when it comes to entering these clinical trials, even if they happen to be living near a large cancer center or in a large capital city in Western Europe. And basically, that means that the same barriers that populations face in their interface with the health system overall plays out even more starkly when it comes to cancer care, and specifically when it comes to accessing cutting-edge and innovative cancer therapies. So I've now briefly laid out the problems, but then what are the solutions? And that's what we want to focus on today with a very impressive speaker lineup we have for you. We'll be hearing first from Luís Castelo-Branco, who's a professor at the National School of Public Health, Nova University in Lisbon, Portugal. He's the lead author of a EuroHealth article on access to cancer clinical trials, which we'll put into this, the link of which we'll put into the chat box now. And this article basically more or less summarizes everything we'd like to discuss in this webinar. And Luís is our keynote speaker, and he'll be laying out some of those possible avenues to address the disparities in access, which I just mentioned. And after that, we'll have a panel discussion with representatives from comprehensive cancer centers in Sweden and in Poland, and hear how some of those solutions are already being explored and how they're faring in practice. And then we'll end this webinar with reflections from the Association of European Cancer Leagues on the patient and people's perspective on real-world clinical trials. So let's begin with our keynote presentation. So over to you, Luís.
Thank you very much, Deepa, for this great introduction on the topic, and you summarized it very well, if I may. So I'm, as Deepa said, I'm Luís Castelo-Branco, medical oncologist, doctor of public health, and from Nova Medical School, Lisbon. So we are talking about essentially how to improve equitable access to cancer research in Europe over the last few minutes. So essentially, we all know that cancer is a leading cause of death and morbidity globally, and that trials are very helpful and to lead innovation and to find better solutions for our patients. And we also know that there's a lot of recent developments that are improving outcomes in terms of survival and quality of life for patients with different types of tumor diseases. But, you know, there are also still some challenges, and looking for the European context, most trials are conducted in selected countries and centers. While these numbers are depending on the setting, we know that more or less 60% of real-life patients do not fit for trials inclusion criteria. So this means a huge number of our daily clinical practice is based on having some challenges that we are not, that evidence of the trials did not fully address. So this is very important and to optimize the way we treat our patients. And we know there are some structural barriers from not only geography, but also in terms of regulation, infrastructures, literacy, and funding. I will divide this more or less in three main dimensions. We can look at this from different angles, but we can look from the disparities between countries, Western and Eastern, North and South, and where some countries are top recruiters and have a lot of clinical trials in oncology ongoing, while others having much lower research. Then within the countries, inside the countries, we can also look at some heterogeneities. For instance, in Paris versus rural France, or in Italy, where we'll have main research centers and top research centers in some areas, but others are excluded or having much lower number of ongoing clinical trials, like Sicilia or Calabria. So Milan, as an example, having some top worldwide known centers, and other regions which having much lower number of clinical trials ongoing. So this means in the same country we can see heterogeneities, and then also in the same center we can have some challenges in terms of how patients are selected to participate in clinical trials. I'll just give you one example. In one center, the patient with the same disease, the same theoretical inclusion criteria for one specific clinical trial, but a native with a high literacy living nearby the hospital, and another patient being treated in the same hospital, but expat with a low literacy living in a rural area. So while this is more difficult to measure, and I believe we need to, by the way, address this more carefully and having some more research to look at how much this is happening globally, this is much likely that the first case, the native high literacy patient living nearby the city center, will be included or more likely to participate in a clinical trial. This is another final dimension on the differences beyond the objective clinical trial inclusion criteria that may affect access to treatment and access to innovation for many patients. So essentially, we may have top recruiters like Belgium, but also I would like to highlight perhaps Netherlands and Denmark, where having a lot of clinical trials per number of patients. Some, on the other extreme, some countries where there are much less access to clinical trials and research. And one interesting case is that when you look, for instance, let's take the case of Italy, where you know that some centers in Italy are of excellence and a lot of ongoing clinical trials and research, but the number of clinical trials per habitants, it's somehow intermediate because many regions are excluded. So overall, this is a heterogeneous access inside the same country. But how can we focus on solutions? What can you do to improve this? Going directly to some possible ways to mitigate or to improve the way we mitigate these issues. One first and top priority can be investment in smaller and decentralized centers. So essentially providing the infrastructures for more centers and to have proper training that they are prepared to conduct and to have more patients, that their patients can benefit from different clinical trials. Another important dimension can be the implementations of more pragmatic clinical trials. And we tend to talk about pragmatism in clinical trials on a broader inclusion. So having more or having a more inclusive criteria. So this means more subgroups of patients can be included. But I do think another essential dimension that we don't talk too much is about real-world applicability. So it's not only about having more patients being enrolled, but that the trial is designed in a way that it can be applicable in more centers and across regions, that the conditions are there, and that we can, if it is positive, we can replicate it in different centers, countries, and regions. There's also the high potential good quality real-world data that we are routinely collecting from our practice, and we can use it to provide complementary, at least, evidence that can help us to optimize decisions and to generate evidence in areas and settings where trials were not fully addressing it. And another very important dimension is more collaboration through European Union networks. So we essentially to optimize the way you collaborate across centers and across countries. And just mention two important initiatives: the National Cancer Mission Hubs and the European Network of Comprehensive Cancer Centers, but there are others. So essentially is that the fact that we can optimize the way you collaborate on to deliver better outcomes for our patients. And I know it looks long time ago, but COVID-19 pandemic was not that far and was an outstanding opportunity to learn. We were forced to change in many dimensions and to change our practice and the way we are providing care to our patients, but also in the way we're conducting research. So essentially what we did is looking into looking for clinical trials and for real-world evidence in separate, and doing two publications on what could we learn from this period that we are forced to make changes, and what can we learn in terms of to optimize research for the future. So what are the learning lessons that we can keep doing and help us to optimize the way we conduct research and also clinical care. And there's one common learning lesson, if I may. There's opportunities for more flexible, collaborative, and decentralized approaches for research. During that period, we were forced to collaborate, we were forced to collect data faster and to address new unmet needs. And we learn also on how to keep doing it and to strengthen such collaborative networks for the future. Another dimension I briefly spoke is about the pragmatism in clinical trials, and importantly, pragmatic clinical trials and pragmatism in clinical trials is not a black or white thing. It's not saying that a trial should be, or we only need explanatory trials, or the trials should be all pragmatic. It's not about that. It's more about considering that trials can have some pragmatic dimensions, and there's this precise will which help us to better assess it and to look into different important dimensions. What can be a pragmatic trial? Essentially, a pragmatic trial is to be more aligned with what will be our clinical practice. But we also need the explanatory trials to show the evidence in very restricted conditions. So it's not one or another, but the way that both can run and can be complementary, generating evidence that will support decisions for the different stakeholders in the ecosystem, for clinicians when seeing their patients, but also for policymakers to know better where to invest and how to invest to optimize outcomes for our patients. There's also a very interesting publication, if you are interested in the topic, by the OTC group a few weeks ago, precisely on the possible roles of pragmatic clinical trials for cancer. Obviously, very important is different EU level initiatives ongoing and the investment from the European Commission on this topic. So European Beating Cancer Plan, the clinical trials information system that now also, by the way, a recent online tool that help us to find trials for patients in each region. So it's a very interesting tool that can facilitate access and to know which trials are running in different areas. The European Cancer Inequalities Registry and National Cancer Mission Hubs is a very interesting and important and challenging initiative precisely to facilitate the collaborative networks for cancer research and care on different regions. So inside the countries, but also that they can establish international collaborative networks between different countries. So we all know that there are many disparities still on access to cancer care and to cancer research in the European Union. And this is for different countries, for different regions, and for different subgroups of people. We also know most of the solutions for this. I think what we need to do is a faster and broader implementation. And I do think that we all play a role here. So we know that we can identify it properly. We know that there are many things that we can do, but we can also think on what can we do to have a small contribution to facilitate this process, that we are moving more towards a more equitable access to cancer care and research in the European Union. So we can generate more evidence on the topic. We can collaborate with centers. So there's all the stakeholders may have a role to play here, and I do think this is an important core message, that we can think also which small things we can contribute to facilitate this process and to reduce inequities to access to clinical care and research in the European Union. As I mentioned, collaboration, I truly think modern collaboration between different stakeholders across regions is essential. This is one thing that we can optimize, and there's also many learning opportunities there, and establishing common goals and identifying top priorities for all the stakeholders can be very important for this process. So finally, equitable access to cancer research is key to fulfilling the EU mission of leaving no patient behind. I think if I have to say one final sentence, I will say this one. This is not only about research. This is not about ideas. This is truly about providing access to care and research for patients and for people across the European Union in the most equitable way possible. And there are many ways and tools, and we know how to do it. We just need to do it more efficiently. And thank you very much for your time. And if you're interested in the topic, we just recently published, as Deepa mentioned, an article precisely on this. And I'm very thankful also for the observatory and the Aero Health initiative, which is a fantastic initiative that bridges, in my humble opinion, the different stakeholders in the European Union who are interested in health issues, and in this case specifically in cancer, and also for the co-authors of this article for their incredible and fantastic inputs. And so if you are interested, feel free to read this, and we'll have a bit more information there. Thank you so much, all of you, for the attention, and I'm very happy to discuss any questions that you may have on the end.
Thank you, Luis, for this concise but informative overview of this topic of access and equity of access to innovative cancer therapies through clinical trials. So we've now heard, dear audience, not only about the state of play in terms of the barriers to access, but also some important solutions. And I think, Luis, you laid out really nicely some of those, for example, more pragmatism in clinical trials. And I think it's an important point you made also, that this is not an either or with pragmatic trials and explanatory trials, that it's really a continuum, and one can have pragmatic elements even in explanatory trials, and there are trials that are sort of a mix in between. And for those who may be unfamiliar with those terms, an explanatory trial is basically one that's done in much more strict clinical conditions, where you have a strict inclusion criteria of your patient cohort with a long list of often exclusion criteria, and it's mainly done for therapeutic efficacy, to assess therapeutic efficacy of medicines, for example. And a pragmatic trial aims to have more real-world patients with multimorbid patients that you might exclude from an explanatory trial. Another aspect that Luis highlighted is using high-quality real-world data, where you actually get that data about those real patients, and not just the sort of the clinical trial type patients, and also more collaboration across EU networks, so cross-nationally, but also, more importantly, also between smaller decentralized cancer centers and larger centers, and that's where networks come into play, and where during the COVID crisis, Luis so nicely mentioned, we really saw that it is possible to collaborate more closely and leverage the different capacities in the different centers. So on that note, let's hear now from our spotlight speakers who will be addressing how some of those solutions are being tried and tested. Specifically, we'll look at Sweden and Poland. So let me introduce our Swedish speaker from the prestigious Karolinska Institute. Eva Jolli heads the project unit at the Karolinska Comprehensive Cancer Center, and she'll talk to us today specifically on how Sweden is leveraging networks both nationally and internationally in the quest for improved equity in access to cancer therapies. So over to you, Eva.
Today, I want to share how Sweden is working toward ensuring that all patients, regardless where they live, have an opportunity to participate in clinical trials. So this is not a yet finished system in Sweden. In fact, we still have significant challenges, especially when it comes to regional differences and limited trial accessibility in some of the areas. However, a number of strategic efforts are now underway of addressing these gaps. The vision is to create a more coordinated and inclusive patient-centered clinical trial environment in Sweden. While much remains to be done, this work reflects an important shift in mindset from isolated efforts to collaborative system-level reform. In a country as large and sparsely populated as Sweden is, access can be a challenge. But we have seen how strong national networks supported by an organizational healthcare system can create more equal opportunities, even for patients in more remote areas. So the first initiative that I would like to speak about is the SWE trial. It's a national platform for clinical trials. And this is still under development, but has a strong potential to improve the Sweden clinical trial landscape. So SWE trial aims to streamline the processes to support innovation and make Sweden more attractive environment to high quality research. It is designed to serve as a unified entry point for clinical trials, not only in oncology, but of course also focusing on the cancer field. This is something that currently is lacking in our country. So the key areas of focus for SWE trial is simplifying applications and biomaterial handling, is to strengthen support structures across regions, and addressing legal and administrative bottlenecks. So this is work in progress. The structure is not fully yet in place, but the goal is clear, is to create a more accessible and competitive trial system in Sweden. Next slide, please. In recent years, Sweden has also invested in national therapy networks and regional trial units. These are important steps toward improving geographically equity in trial access. The comprehensive cancer centers of Sweden, now we have 5, mostly centered to the larger populated areas like the big cities, but also the Clinical Studies of Sweden are central players in this network. Their role is to support, coordinate, and help ensure that patients across all regions, urban and rural, can access clinical trials. And in addition to this, Sweden Comprehensive Cancer Center has joined forces with the neighboring countries in the Nordic and Baltic area in a network that fosters also the bigger regional collaboration in cancer research. This is also an ongoing project that started just before COVID. Next slide, please. I will also briefly touch upon 2 essential enablers of this transformation that is ongoing in Sweden, the digital infrastructure and also the Biobank Sweden. In 2024, the update of the Swedish life science strategy highlighted the urgent need for a national digital infrastructure to support and secure efficient sharing of health data across providers and research actors. This would be a major step forward, especially for decentralized trials. But right now, Sweden's data system remain fragmented and hard to navigate. So this is also something that is part of the strategies. Equally critical is also Biobank Sweden. It's a national infrastructure that ensures the safe standardized use of biological samples, and it plays a central role in precision medicine, where access to well-documented, high-quality samples often are essential for trial success, of course. Together, these systems form the backbone of a modern research ecosystem, one that is more inclusive, efficient, and data-driven, and they need to be further developed, scaled, and better integrated into the Swedish society to be successful. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, Sweden is working on a number of forward-looking strategies to simplify ethics and regulatory processes, improving national coordination of trials, expanding decentralized trials that help avoid long and costly travel for patients, making participation more feasible, especially in rural or remote areas. Sweden is also deeply engaged in EU-funded initiatives, as we already heard the importance of by Louise, through both the EU's Beating Cancer Plan and the Mission on Cancer. Several of these projects that we are involved in from the Swedish side aim to enhance cancer trial capabilities and lay the groundwork for a European clinical trial engine. And finally, Sweden has some unique strengths, like population-based health data, strong registries, and also trusted public-private partnership. So in summary, Sweden is not there yet, but is making a deliberate shift towards a more inclusive, digitally enabled, and collaborative trial environment. The building blocks are being laid and the direction is promising. The challenge now is to turn strategies into systems and to ensure that no patient is left out, no matter where they live. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva, for this very comprehensive overview of what's going on in Sweden. And I think this really shows a very systemic perspective that you're taking in Sweden. You're sort of working in a multi-pronged way, trying to defragment so that, because basically what does defragmentation do? It makes it simpler for centers that have less capacity, for example, not the big comprehensive cancer centers, to access data and include patient into trials. You're working on the networks cross-nationally with the Baltics and also nationally. National therapy network. So these are some really great examples, and hopefully we can dig into them a little bit more in the question and answer round. Let's hear now from our next speaker from Poland, and we are going to hear from Iwona Ługowska, who is a professor and heads the Center of Excellence in Precision Oncology at the Maria Skłodowska-Curie National Institute of Oncology in Warsaw. Iwona, please do give us your perspective on this topic. What is Poland doing to increase access to clinical trials in cancer? Over to you.
So first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. And after a very elegant and beautiful presentation of Eva about systemic perspective from Sweden, I don't have slides for you because I would like to share with you my personal perspective and how it was possible to break barriers in terms of improving access to innovative cancer therapies here in Poland. As Deepa said, I'm professor in Maria Skłodowska-Curie Institute. This is a national cancer institute, and for many years we are a leading center for oncological trials in our country. So right now we have more than 600 of clinical trials only for oncology. However, 10 years ago, and it was 2015, I was deeply involved in sarcoma patients, and my first barrier was to have a drug for patients and to include those patients with sarcoma, with rare tumors, into cancer into clinical trials. So we decided to allocate our time, our energy to go into early phase clinical trials. As I mentioned before, there was a huge landscape of phase 3 studies, but for rare disease or for phase 1 studies dedicated to solid tumors, there was almost zero. And the first barrier was how to first build this kind of environment, how to convince sponsor, and where we can learn to know how those trials should be run in appropriate way. And I would like to come back to 2017 and absolutely amazing opportunity for me to go to Newcastle and to collaborate with Professor Ruth Plummer, because she said, okay, please come to my site and to see, then go back to your country and set up early phase clinical trials unit for your cancer patients. And it was beautiful way how to do this first step forward. And indeed, with this knowledge, I am here in Poland, and in 2017, we are opening our first in Poland, the early phase clinical trials unit. And indeed, it was a challenge because we needed to also convince sponsors that we are really ready to go with the very demanding phase 1 studies, also with first in human. However, the competence, education, and really hard work was successful. And after 7 years, we have in our unit more than 80 early phase clinical trials, also with first in human. So this is the first barrier that was possible to break. And indeed, with strong leadership and motivation and great team, and also be supported by the directors, leaders of the sites, we can do, and we can provide patient opportunity to be also involved in early phase studies, especially when they do not have that much opportunity to get treatments with the standard of care. However, we found the problem also with, and it was another barrier, it was a little bit mentioned before, with the drug access on one hand, but also with the travel. The patients who need to be in early phase or clinical studies must be in close contact with site. So it's why we also collaborate with our colleagues, and in 2019 in Gdańsk, a similar department, early phase clinical trials department in Gdańsk has been opened, and right now we strongly collaborate. However, we wanted to have more, and it's why we got opportunity that's based on the Act of Parliament, Polish Parliament, in February 2019, we were able to have the Medical Research Agency. So the aim of the Medical Research Agency was also to improve access to innovative therapies to our patients and also provide research. And with this, we try to also to help Medical Research Agency to organize network of sites where clinical trials and access to patients closer to the patient's neighborhood will be possible. So indeed, over the time, right now, this network of clinical sites is fully operable. And then we have in each 2 branch, one that's of course the medical professionals. However, those medical professionals need to be supported by administrative team to do startup fast, then to conduct and to support administration, which is quite significant when we are doing clinical trials. So Medical Research Agency also found that we just need to have the sites, to have the network, we need to also educate. And this education, it's very important to educate new staff, educate from new PIs to understand how to write the protocol. Because if we can do our own studies, then of course the innovative cancer therapies for our patients, we can have we have more. And it's why this Medical Research Agency did another very important step forward, that we wanted to have the academic research, and it was another barrier, because to have academic research we need to have not only knowledge but also resources. And with this, the idea of Medical Research Agency is also to provide funds based on the, of course, calls for those patients, for researchers who want to run academic studies. And with this, we were able not only to run for our cancer patients, but also for rare tumors and also for pediatric population with cancer, which is very, very important, because indeed this is the unmet needs. And coming from my personal perspective, our site and also national level, I would like to move a little bit further to Europe. And right now we have a lot of initiatives, and one that I would like to stress, it's Comprehensive Cancer Infrastructure for EU, CCI for EU project. And within this project, we did two very important steps. First, to understand where we are with the infrastructure, cancer infrastructure in Europe. So within this project, we did the maturity model. And then, based on the maturity model, we found out that at least two very important aspects are critical right now. First, patients' pathways, and then clinical research. And with this, we select countries with a huge needs how to increase the clinical trials and access to those trials. Based on that, experts goes to this country to deep dives to help those countries to have the better access to clinical trials to provide for patients. So with those ideas, starting from Iwona Ługowska perspective, finishing on the CCI for EU project, I would like to stress that we still have two very important aspects. One, it's regulatory. It's a lot of around registration and efforts, how we can register trials, but still we need to be much more faster. And because we have two very important players, one is China and Asia and States. So to have the access, we need to be faster. And then it's a patient's perspective. So if we have great site, we have trial, but patients are not aware about the clinical trials, it doesn't make sense at all. So to understand, to provide patients information, to make the literacy in this community, also to give the patients information that not only a standard of care is an option, that are sites that you can go and you can ask for consultation. It's really very important. And especially when we are talking about the innovation and new technologies and personalized cancer medicine and cell therapies, it's also very important to have access to right diagnostics. So this is also a responsibility for countries. So with this, I would like to thank you very much for invitation and for your attention.
Thank you, Iwona, for that very comprehensive perspective. I think you highlighted some really key points that, yes, we need to build capacity, educate health professionals, get more resources to researchers to be able to go out to those patients who are in unmet need at the moment. We need to look at the patient perspective as well, like transport costs you mentioned, a very simple thing, but can be a huge barrier. And we'll hear more about patient perspectives right now, actually, from our next speaker, who is from the Association of European Cancer Leagues, Wolfgang Fecke, who is now the Executive Director of ECL. So Wolfgang, give us a civil society perspective on this topic. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Deepa. Yeah, so just a few seconds I want to use now here to introduce ECL. So we are really an umbrella organization of national cancer leagues. And as you can see, we are now 34 members strong. We are really present in 28 countries across the whole continent. Of course, not all just the European Union, but we also go beyond the EU. And the main role for us is really to act as really a central point of contact between the different cancer leagues. And these leagues, they are the main resources for public information on cancer control and on services in their own countries. And there's a lot of work these weeks are doing. So we have many meetings here, working groups where people can exchange ideas, work on best practice models, and try to improve overall the situation in their respective countries. So ECL is really working on the whole continuum of cancer care. So we are starting with prevention. And here in this webinar, we're looking more into the actual treatment options, but also in early diagnosis options for cancer patients. And then the fourth pillar of our action is really to look at the patients after they were treated, initially treatment, and how they can find their way back to work. So in the previous talks, we heard quite a lot about comprehensive cancer centers. We heard about the Europe-speaking cancer plan. But you also heard from Lee's talk at the beginning that there are still a lot of differences in really in the whole European region. You have well-developed countries, let's say on average at least, that they provide very good care for patients, let's say often in Western Europe. Then they have other situations where really this is something where a lot of work still needs to be done. And the European Beating Cancer Plan was really set up in 2021 to really aim to avoid these to support the development of equalities between the different countries. Yeah, so to get rid of all these differences. And they have ambitious aims, but then again, if you look at it, by 2028, the idea is to have at least one comprehensive cancer center in each of the countries in Europe. And that is maybe not as ambitious as it should be. And there are many questions also about the future of that plan and the finance and the activities which are currently ongoing. But the inequalities are not only within Europe, so they are even within certain countries, quite some differences. For example, in Germany or in Berlin, where I live, there are big differences due to language issues. We have deprived areas of the inner cities areas where people just don't understand, actually. And they don't understand the rights, they don't understand where they can find information, and so on. And there's a lot of work to do to actually target these particular populations. So some of the ideas which could be done are, of course, included in Europe-speaking cancer plan. But as I said in the beginning, there still needs to be a lot of work done. So even if you have a very nicely certified cancer center in a country which is on average well served for cancer care, you need to target, you need to find the patients. Yeah, you want to include in trials the patients you want to really treat with drugs on the market. And there are wonderful databases where in principle these cancer centers can be found, but often people just don't know about it. So I think what is really necessary is that there is a very good collaboration between, let's say, a hub, a center, a certified center where people can go and they know that they get a very good care there. And we have heard examples from Sweden or also from Poland, but then also local clinicians who are really then in contact and collaborate with these centers, and they're able to work with the patients they have. Of course, we have to see then how to get these patients included into the trials. And there are many barriers, as we heard. Language barriers is the first one. There are social, economic barriers. People might not want to go there. And you need local advocates to really get these people into the trials. But then there are also other factors for what you can do, even if you work with patients who just cannot get to the actual center of excellence. And again, collaboration is necessary. There might be remote diagnosis possibilities nowadays. I mean, something what we called in the past telemedicine is now really quite developed. There are many devices. They might work better for some cancers than for others. Skin cancers can be tested with certain variables, but also treatments. Innovative treatments from trials can be actually given remotely if there's a good collaboration between the center and participating local clinicians. And I've put here on the slide one example, for example, cancer vaccines, a very hot topic, could be used also for patients who are not able to come. Another important factor is the topic of variables. And here we actually coordinated a project, and I've put the link here onto the slide called Bumper. So here we are developing an app, and it's nearly done actually. Just needs to have some special features here, like translating in all these 22 different languages in the EU, for example. All this needs to be done. But with this app, every patient or every person at risk can actually create their own cancer risk profile, and the app will ask them then, okay, what are you doing? How do you live your life? And then to see how you can improve your situation. And the app will give you some goals to achieve, and will also ask you questions and give you sources for really learning more about your particular situation. There is a lot of information on getting patients to cancers or to cancer centers and getting patients the right medicines. We have developed a manifesto which Deepa can probably put into the chat if you really want to learn a little bit more. And as my last slide here, I just want to give you just a snapshot on the huge inequalities which still exist within Europe in all different areas. Yeah, we have different countries here. If you look at the level of specialization of doctors, if you look at the therapy which is available, for example, here as an example, radiotherapy. If you look at the reimbursement of costs here between, for example, Malta and Estonia, if you look at the medicines which are available, particularly for very vulnerable populations like kids with cancer, there are big risks, and it just shows you that there is so much more to do. And with that, I would like to stop here.
And again, we come back to we need networks and collaboration. This comes up really in every contribution that we've had today. The big cancer centers need to collaborate with smaller centers, with rural areas, with where the patients are, where those real world patients are. And for that, we do need local advocates and information to be available locally. Wolfgang also highlighted something quite important, the leveraging digital solutions like remote diagnosis, like wearables. These are even therapy in local areas and for some trials administered locally, but managed more at a kind of comprehensive cancer center. So these are all ways that we're trying to get those patients that are at the moment not getting included into these trials in them. So let's move to the chat box. Erica, we have 10 minutes. Let's see what we can get on questions. Tell us what's going on there in terms of the discussion.
Yeah, so some really interesting, really good questions coming in. Particularly around the practicalities of cross-border collaborations on things like the Nordic-Baltic collaboration. So how do you deal with reimbursement? Do you move the patient or do you move the data? Is this an opportunity for these sorts of decentralized trials using sort of digital tech more effectively? So any practical experience people have of that, particularly around sort of reimbursement of care? And then how do we balance these explanatory and pragmatic trials and the need for scientific rigor? What do we see looking into our crystal balls? Where might the shifts be over the next decade? But also what needs to change within the EMA to actually accommodate these shifts? And then what are the main regulatory barriers to these sort of both cross-border collaborations, but also the development of pragmatic clinical trials that the EU could address at the EU legislation level? What can the EU do to further facilitate the development of both cross-border collaboration, but also pragmatic clinical trials? I'm going to go back into the chat box now.
Okay, lots of great questions there. I'm looking at the panel. Who wants to start? Just choose whichever question you'd like to take and give us your response.
So,
Eva.
yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question also. I wrote something in the chat, but I was thinking that the issues between the Nordic Baltic countries is that we are aiming for the same. We want to have more collaboration and moving from competition into more collaboration, but there are still hurdles, and actually tomorrow there is the annual meeting of the Nordic Baltic Comprehensive Cancer Center network in Copenhagen, addressing these questions because also of the different interpretations that our countries are doing with for instance the GDPR. So even there is a spirit and there is a will, there is still hurdles and that we need to conquer. So I hope I can come back in a year or so and maybe we have found some new solutions. Thank you.
Thanks, Eva. Yes, different interpretations of GDPR is a barrier to, for a lot of things these days. Looking to the panel, anyone would like to take the question, perhaps Luis, on the issue of balancing rigor with pragmatism in trials?
Thanks, Deepa. It's a very interesting question, and I will merge that one also with what EU can do. And I do think the answer is that there is a lot of ongoing initiatives like the new clinical trials regulation. That is now time to see it being more implemented and see how it will facilitate the full process. So, and then as all the changes to be properly monitored, that we identify the challenges that will help us to move forward and to improve. This is one thing. Another important dimension coupled to that is when you look for decentralized clinical trials. Partially, the answer is to design trials that will facilitate and will allow for this since the beginning. So you have the main centers and you have smaller centers that can collaborate and can be included for different for specific pathways and for specific objectives during the clinical trial. So and this is being addressed by several groups and be claiming these opportunities and being talking on how to do it and how to integrate also telemedicine and innovative to move this forward. But we need to try it more, and we need to design and implement trials that will address these and will integrate these efficiently. And this is not only about, again, about the research, it's about facilitating access for patients nearby their living place, you know, and these collaborative networks can also consider and establish that the main center has a role for things that will be difficult to have in a smaller centers, but there are some tasks that you can do in clinical practice and clinical research that you can do in smaller unities, and this will be of benefit for patients, for centers, for regional healthcare ecosystems, and will foster and will facilitate the improvements. And also, just the fact that you're trying it and doing it, you'll train and you will improve and you learn and on some granularities on how to do this better. So I truly believe that the centralized research with more pragmatism on the design of clinical trials is something we should explore more and more. And of course, the already established collaborative networks are a great opportunity to expand these opportunities.
Thank you, Luis. So again, it's about designing those trials from the beginning with pragmatism in mind, you're better able to ensure that rigor basically by planning those specific patient pathways, giving tasks to the main centers where it fits better, and other tasks to the decentralized center, and that way you don't lose the kind of rigor that you need for these trials. Looking to the panel, anyone would like to take one of the other questions? What needs to change at the EMA? What kind of shift do we need? Or the question around the reimbursement of care? Looking at Iwona and Wolfgang. Iwona, you're laughing. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I can be a volunteer to discuss the topic related to EU CTR and IVDR indeed. So Erika sent you the Accelerating Clinical Trials Europe. This is the very, very important platform where we should always just remember, because indeed, if we implement something new, we need to have time to learn from many perspectives, and also pharma industry need to learn how to navigate through this new system. And if they are more effective in this navigation, then we have trial faster. And this perspective also from country, how to interact, how to make the awareness that we cannot wait. We just need to be on the spot and to respond as fast as possible. It is also very important. And the IVDR case, so it's very important that we would like to be safe. We would like to have a good regulation. However, this in vitro diagnostic medical devices regulation, still it's a major bottleneck for research and clinical trials. So indeed, on one hand, to have the certification, it's very important, but on the other hand, we need to have the opportunity to get the certification. So it's why there is still a lot to do, but with the commitments and willing to change, I'm more than sure that we'll fix this problem in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iwona. So it's, we need time to learn on the new CTR, the clinical trial regulations of the European Medicines Agency, but we also have little time. We need to get the patients in, and we need to, reduce those regulatory barriers. We are about to end, and we're up at the hour, but I just wanted to look at Wolfgang. Did you want to make any last comments before we close this webinar?
Maybe if I can, in the last 30 seconds, that it will be really challenging, especially for multi-center trials, to get patients on board, especially for example, rare cancers. And what is really absolute requirement at the EU level is to make that easier, to align the administrative, let's say, hurdles and lower them really, so that also companies find it more attractive to invest in Europe and to do their tests there instead of doing them in the States or in China.
Thanks a lot. So again, we have that patient perspective, especially for rare cancers, but we need EU regulations and requirements to adapt, obviously. So we are at the top of the hour. We have one more webinar, dear audience, in this cancer policy webinar series on the 17th of June from 12 to 1, where we'll be looking actually at cancer inequalities very specifically. So please do join us and connect in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much to all the speakers and the audience, and we'll see you next time.